What's up, guys? Today we are reviewing a 2006 CBR600RR from Honda. I'm sitting on the bike right now, so while we're waiting in traffic, let's queue up the walk around. So now that we're moving, you've seen what my piece of junk looks like. Here's a picture real quick of what this bike looks like stock. It's a lot prettier. So first of all, a little housekeeping. You've seen my review on the 07. So the 05 and the 06 was the first major revision. There was a second major revision in 07. So the bikes are quite a bit different, even though there's only a year, because this one's in 06 and the other one I reviewed was in 07. There is quite a bit of difference in power and power delivery, in the chassis, in the suspension. So you either want to buy an 05 and 06 bike, or you want to step up to an 07 forward bike. I think there was another major revision in 2012, I believe, but that's outside the scope of this. So now that we have the highway here, we might as well check out what it feels like cruising at highway speeds. And again, I can't say yay or nay on the aerodynamics because I don't have any. So now we're in top gear. 65 miles an hour comes at about 6,000 RPM. This is a stock bike. Fry Riding's got an 07. Oh, here we go. Fry Riding's got an 07, and he rides a lot on the highway, and he's geared up because this bike definitely does a little bit of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So there's 80 is 7.5. So this bike definitely does a little bit of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, in the sense that 7,000 RPM is a cutoff point. So under 7,000 RPM, this bike reminds me a lot of a Ninja 500, to be honest with you. It's very mellow, very relaxed. There's not a ton of brutal throttle response. It's very rideable. I would have no qualms putting a beginning rider on this bike. But after 7,000 RPM is when this starts acting like a race bike, and you just get this massive hit of power, and it'll take your head off if you're not careful. You know, people don't give enough respect to these 600 cc bikes. So the spec sheet on this one, I believe, is right over 100 horse and right around 40 pound-feet of torque. Compare that with the 07, it makes about 10 more horses. The 07 does, and a little bit more torque. But this bike is a little bit lighter, I believe. So, you know, take it for what you will. In terms of power, this bike is plenty quick, even with the stock exhaust. One thing I've noticed with the stock exhaust, you get a lot more intake noise than you get exhaust note. And, you know, finding a bike like this with a stock exhaust is pretty rare in and of itself, so you probably don't need to worry too much about it. So there we are at $8 grand, and if you just crank it, oh man, she just picks up like crazy. But if we just go up a couple of gears, so now we're at like 5, and I give it the same thing, I mean, you can tell there's a huge difference. I mean, under 7,000 RPM, I can roll on the throttle wide open, and it's not even, I won't say it's not noticeable, but it's not really hard. In my experience, the bike has really excellent kind of mid-range punch. It's very easy to ride in the city, so you don't need to worry about always clutching it up and stuff. It's not a big deal. Speaking of clutch ups, here's a little clip of me trying to do a clutch up wheelie and doing nothing but spinning the rear tire. I still don't understand how you're supposed to do wheelies on sports bikes. Either my weight is off or I'm doing something wrong, because the back end just spins if I clutch up. So I mean, it's a little abrupt right there in that short throttle. are basically like small throttle adjustments off idle. It's a little rough. Oh, God. Sorry. Pinched a nut there against the gas tank. So let me talk a little bit about the suspension here while we're sitting. You got fully adjustable suspension, rebound, dampening, and preload front and rear. I mean, regular sports bike stuff, nothing too fancy. You guys like my little my brake lever? So I'm still waiting. The shorty lever is supposed to come in today, hopefully, because I have a customer coming to look at this bike tomorrow. So hopefully I get that replaced. But it works okay. So in terms of suspension, I think this bike is pretty stiff. It seems to me it's a little bit less compliant. And I've already set up the suspension. It seems to be a little bit less compliant than the 07 I had. The 07 seems to be a little bit easier to ride on. This one seems a little bit more aggressive. Of course, that's a little bit subjective too. So, what else? So, I was the one who brought this bike. This bike had been sitting since an accident in 07. This bike had been sitting forever. And I put a new fuel pump in it. I cleaned up the gas tank, and you know what? It fired right up. A couple of things. The cooling system on this bike seems to be really sensitive. You need to make sure you burp it properly, get all of the air bubbles out. Otherwise, this bike's going to overheat and throw coolant all over your leg, which is really not pleasant because the coolant's really hot. Other than that, everything here is pretty straightforward. The fuel injection, I think, is excellent. I think it could use a pipe, because most of that noise you get is really just intake rush, and there's obviously exhaust noise, but the other thing you can do is you can cut apart the stock exhaust can and debaffle it. That's a lot of work, and honestly, I would just get a used pipe, but you can. Let's move on to the things I am less enthused about. So suspension, engine, I think are great. Fuel economy is pretty nice for 600. Gauge cluster is very visible, easy to read, works well. All of that kind of stuff is great. So let's move on to the things that aren't so great. In 07, they moved to a radial front brake master cylinder, and it is a colossal improvement over this linear master cylinder right here with the reservoir on top. So the radials are the little ones with the reservoir that has to be mounted somewhere over here, and the brake feel on the front of this bike is really lackluster compared to other sports bikes I've ridden. Even the 07 was worlds above it. So one of the things I would recommend doing is I'd recommend throwing an 07 master cylinder on here. The clutch on this bike is really nice and easy though, so the rear brakes also work pretty well. I'm actually really pretty happy with how the rear brake behaves. There's a lot of good feel to it, and it's got plenty of power. It's really just the front brake that I'm not a giant fan of. The other thing I'm not a giant fan of is I'm pretty sure I have it set up the same way as it is stock. I feel like there is way too much of a reach to these front handlebars. My legs are in a pretty good position, but if my butt is where I want it to be so that my legs can shift properly and be comfortable, I feel like the stretch to the bars is really a little bit more. I mean, I'm not an orangutan. Like, I have normal average length arms, but I feel like my hands should be just maybe a centimeter or two closer to my body. But this is the correct angle position for the clip-ons, because otherwise they'll hit the tank at full lock. So I don't know, to me it feels a little stretched. I mean, I can understand why 6'4" Honda likes this bike, because he's a taller guy and he's got longer arms, and so he's gonna feel a little bit more comfortable on it. But for me, it feels a little bit like a stretch. It feels like I'm constantly having to just lay down on this bike to basically ride, and to me that's not a great feeling. I prefer a sports bike to have a little bit of a bigger rider triangle. Also, my legs feel a little bit tight, not a whole lot, it's not bad, but it definitely feels like there could be an extra, centimeter of space in there without much penalty. So those are the things I don't like. The seat's really hard, but whatever. That's kind of part of the charm. I'm also not a huge fan of the undertail exhaust, but that is just something that's, this generation of bike. It comes with an undertail exhaust, so do with it what you will. Other than that, I think this is a really, really solid bike. This would be definitely something I would recommend as kind of a first sports bike. Originally, I had a lot of hate for the Hondas, and I mean, to some degree, I still have a lot of hate because they at least the ones I seem to get, have tons and tons of stupid mechanical issues that I hate having to fix all the time. But once you get them set up and running properly, they work really well, and so. Bitch and moan I have to, but the other thing is, I don't remember this being on the 07, but this actually has like a little tiny locking storage compartment right here. I mean, it's just mounted on a little plastic bracket. You could just rip the whole thing off and take it with you, but for what it's worth, it's there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So all in all, I would say this bike is good. It's not as good as the 07 I had. I would definitely have preferred the 07. The transmission on this bike is also a little bit, the 07 was smoother. This one feels really notchy, and I mean, all my bikes get fresh oil changes, so it's got fresh rotella, fresh filter, so on and so forth. So it really is the transmission in this bike rather than, an oil or whatever. But it feels a little notchy. It's not hard to use, but it feels like you're just slamming it in gear. You don't get a clunk or anything out of it. It's just that it feels like the gear, like the dog ears, are just a little too tight for the ridges. It's not a smooth transition, but it's not bad. The other thing is, I feel like the clutch is like always right at the very end. That's an adjustment thing. I could probably dial it back in a little bit, but I noticed that on the 07 as well. I think it just might be the way the Honda designs them. Again, it's not a major issue. These are all little niggles, but some of these things bother people. Anyway, all in all, I'd probably give this bike maybe like a 7.5 out of 10. It's definitely well above average. It's pretty solid. I don't know that I'd want to commute on it every day, but if I could only afford, I mean, everything depends on your style, right? If you could only afford to have one bike, this is not a bad bike to make your it bike. Let's put it that way. You can do a hell of a lot worse than a Honda CBR600RR. However, if you have the coin, I would recommend going with an 07 Plus. I found that the price differential isn't really that great, but in the sense of, one of these used might be about $4,000 and an 07 Plus might be like $4,500 or $4,600. So I would spend the extra $500 and get it, because I think that the 07 Plus suspension is more supple, and the brakes are better, and of course it's got a little bit more power and blah blah blah, but the difference between 105 horses and 115 horses is mostly lost on most people, realistically. As far as a track-only bike, excellent. I see absolutely no reason, because if you're going to spend all of your time at over if you're going to spend all your time over $7,000 anyway, this is an awesome bike for that, because it really does have that kind of Jekyll and Hyde effect, where once you cross that 7,000 RPM line, all of a sudden it's like the gates of hell have been unleashed, and you're left to kind of fend for yourself. It's not so abrupt that it picks up the front wheel or anything like that, but it is definitely a little scary when you first get used to it. I mean, that's not really even, you know, hard acceleration. I was barely getting on it, and you saw by the time I was shifting into second gear, we were already hitting 70 miles an hour. So, you know, respect the 600 is, I guess, my point. While I still believe that a liter bike is better and better for commuting, this is a very, very solid choice in the 600 category. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you liked it, please subscribe. Check out some of my other reviews. And I will continue doing these reviews. And if you'd like to see something else implemented, some more technical information or whatever, feel free to just leave a comment, and we'll see what we can do. Thanks, guys.